Some of the worst fights my partner and I have had in our relationship have been about Overcooked. This isn't novel. In fact, we know a lot of couples who refuse to play Overcooked together because they worry about the impact it might have on their relationship. Frankly, just hearing the game's name spikes my anxiety a little bit. In spite of all this, Overcooked 2 is our favorite co-op title to play together. Developed by Ghost Town Games, the game challenges you to run increasingly busy, increasingly chaotic kitchens together, filling orders, getting them out on time, surviving a hot air balloon crash into a sushi kitchen and pivoting to a different recipe. You know the drill. If you'll pardon my smugness for a second, we don't just love this game, we excel at it. This is not a sentiment that I extend lightly. I don't think I'm particularly good at most of my favorite games, maybe good at enjoying them at best. But with Overcooked, I feel like we have put in work. We've learned each other's communication styles, figured out our efficiencies, developed intricate shorthands. New recipes might come with a learning curve, new biomes certainly do, but once you figure out a game plan, any given level just clicks. Once you hit that flow state, the game becomes an elegantly choreographed dance, you and your partner pirouetting across the stage, station to service. I'm going to be honest. For the past few years, I've just been happy to play the game and others like it together. To enjoy this flow state as one. In a strange way, they bring out the best parts of how we are in the relationship. How we help each other, how we treat each other, and how we handle stress as a couple. But my partner, a developmental psychologist, thinks there's another half to this equation, a deeper reason that's driven by the games themselves. So today, let me tell you a little bit about that, with a bit of help.
There's a concept in psychology and the social sciences called joint attention. It refers to two or more people paying attention to the same thing. When you point something out to someone, you're asking them to jointly attend to it with you. People often talk about screens as if they're isolating, and they can be, but we often jointly attend to things on screens together. Watching TV, going to the cinema, playing games, or even just watching someone else play a game are all examples of when you're jointly attending to a screen with someone else. Joint attention is pretty important for forming and strengthening social bonds. There's a lot of research on shared attention with kids. It's important for their social development, and they feel more comfortable with adults who engage in joint attention with them. But joint attention can help strengthen bonds between adults too. Prior literature shows that jointly attending to a screen together can cause you to feel a stronger social bond with your partner. So watching a movie with your partner or watching your partner play a video game can, in fact, help you feel closer to them.
Before we get too deep in, I want to highlight an important clarification. Throughout this video, we're going to be talking about a lot of different games. Games we've played with each other, next to each other, or with our friends. We are going to focus on couch co-op exclusively and not get into online multiplayer. This is because we typically play in person together.
And the ways in which we've thought about games bringing us closer together all have to do with playing together in person. That's not to say some of these phenomena couldn't also apply to online multiplayer gaming. I just haven't thought about it very much. That wouldn't be me-search, just research, which is what I already do for my day job. As Arf mentioned, I am a developmental psychologist and PhD candidate. My work specifically focuses on children's understanding of money, and, related to that, how they think about fairness in situations involving bargaining and coordination. Obviously, Overcooked is all about coordination, and in some ways, it's about fairness and bargaining too. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get into the specifics of why the title has been more successful for us than other games, it's useful to look at games, more broadly, through the lens of joint attention. I didn't have the same history with video games that Arf did. I played casually at best, and a lot of that time was spent fighting over the controller with my siblings. It wasn't until I started watching Arf play that I began to notice games could inspire closeness through joint attention, even from the backseat. There's a lot of great work on this, but we wanted to highlight one in particular, a paper by Wolf, Lanne, and Dunbar that looks at how shared attention and shared goals impact how you feel about your partner. As a young, occasional gamer, I played a lot of LEGO Star Wars with my siblings. When Arf and I started gaming together, I was excited to return to LEGO titles, and then unexpectedly disappointed when the titles I most wanted to play were split screen. Despite the fact that I could no longer be killed by another player literally moving the screen away from me, and my mobility wasn't limited by that of other players, I felt more disconnected, as if we were doing our own thing instead of trying to accomplish something together. Wolf, Launay, and Dunbar manipulated this feeling of shared goals by either assigning players their own scores, similar to how each player has their own coins during active play in Star Wars, or by giving them a joint score that doesn't distinguish between each player's contributions, even while playing. More like Overcooked. They also assigned players to an individual or shared attention condition by asking them to attend to a different or the same side of the screen. You might have expected that both conditions matter, and that shared everything is better. Players who share goals and attention via the same side of the screen would bond the most. But that wasn't the case. The experimenters found that individual versus shared goals didn't matter at all. Instead, it was only shared attention that predicted ratings of social bonding. Players who attended to the same side of the screen while playing rated their partners more highly afterwards. And I think this impact of shared attention is related to feeling like you're sharing an experience, as opposed to just a goal.
LEGO DC Supervillains, for instance, is separated into linear story-based sections and a more open-world hub that you can freely explore between missions. In those open-world segments especially, we'd end up with a lot of distance between us drifting towards different points of interest, even though we were ostensibly working towards the same thing. If one of us needed help, it was a whole journey across the map to get back to them. It felt more like a divide and conquer approach than a truly collaborative, unified one. And sure, these were fun games. They just didn't do a whole lot in terms of making us feel connected. This isn't to say split-screen co-op can't make you feel connected, of course. Our favorite use of it so far has been Hazelight's It Takes Two, and that's largely because the game was designed around this as the core mechanic. The game follows May and Cody, a married couple on the cusp of divorce, who get turned into dolls by their child's tears and need to learn to work together if they're to return to their original selves. In It Takes Two, you and your partner are still looking at different parts of the screen for the majority of the game, but there are key moments when the dividing line disappears, and you share a full screen together. The variety helps and makes for a dynamic experience. This is narratively interesting too. The two characters have to learn to work together and repair their relationship, but they're still very different people having a hard time seeing each other. So, the dividing line helps convey the distance between them, and the moments the screen joins together feel like the game pushing them together, forcing the divide to disappear. This is a core theme of the game that also plays out in the way it balances the competition-cooperation dynamic of multiplayer gaming. Since the story revolves around a couple coming together after becoming emotionally distant, the game is primarily focused on creating opportunities for effective collaboration. But it also holds space for some fun, healthy competition in the moments between. Scattered throughout the levels, you'll find minigames and random diversions that offer you a chance to take a break from coordinating all the time. They also offer Cody and May a chance to banter, and we enjoyed those bits of competitive play, even though it's not usually what we gravitate towards. When we started playing Overcooked a few years ago, we also tried to introduce it to our larger group. Interestingly, our other friends ended up getting stressed out and just wanted to go back to something competitive, like Towerfall or Sports Friends instead. This was really eye-opening for me. As a kid, I'd played a lot of cooperative and competitive games with my family. Co-op had been a big part of how we'd bonded in the early years. Prior to this, I'd never considered that it could be more stressful than competitive multiplayer, or that there was any difference in how close it made us feel. For our friends though, there was a clear preference for competitive games. On a surface level, I had assumed that helping each other and having a shared goal would provide some kind of comfort, that constantly trying to one-up each other wouldn't. But that wasn't really the case. In fact, I came to notice I myself was more stressed by Overcooked than by Towerfall, and it comes down to one key reason. It feels like less cognitive effort to outsmart or outplay someone else than it does to match with them. It can be advantageous for you to be in your own head and do things differently, to be a little unpredictable. On the other hand, when you're cooperating together, most of the time you can't do your own thing. You also always need to be attending to what the other person is doing and thinking. Now, this can be the case for competitive games too, especially in high levels of play, but you don't have to mentalize the other player's actions to the same degree, so much as you have to notice how they're playing and respond to them.
And there's a lot of research on how people's attitudes, behaviors, and even ways of thinking during tasks can differ in competitive versus collaborative contexts. So you're approaching your partner completely differently when you're competing versus cooperating with them.
This could be its own video, and something we'd be happy to do if there's interest. But we're going to keep focused on co-op here.
We found that for us, playing a co-op game just tends to be a lot more rewarding. and this preference is pretty well supported by the existing literature on cooperative gaming. There's a lot of research that shows that couch cooperative gaming increases social bonds and affiliation between players who are already close friends and players who are strangers. So you might feel more positively about someone after playing a co-op game with them, even if you've never interacted before. And it's not just feelings. Multiple studies have found that cooperative gaming leads to future prosocial behaviors between game partners and strangers. I won't go too deeply into why, but here's a quote from the abstract of a paper by Wolf and Tomasello that I think nicely illustrates the point we're trying to make. Humans evolved to participate with others in unique forms of cooperative and communicative activities that both depend on and create shared experience. Sharing experience in these activities causes partners to feel closer because it allows them to assess their partner's cooperative competence and motivation towards them, and because the shared representations created during such interactions make subsequent cooperative interactions easier and more effective. So, bottom line, co-op gaming is good for your relationships, with friends, with romantic partners, even with strangers. But I've noticed a difference in the kinds of co-op games Arf and I enjoy playing, and
it kind of started with a larger trend of us playing single-player puzzle or strategy games together. With games like The Witness, Firewatch, or Maquette, my partner and I like to trade controllers or shout out possible ideas while the other is in the driver's seat, approaching the game's various verbs in a more co-op capacity. It feels less like backseat gaming, and more so shotgun gaming. As two people who really like solving mystery boxes and escape rooms, this has been a really rewarding way to experience these titles, and since our brains work quite a bit differently, it helps us make up for each other's blind spots. The best way for me to explain this might actually be through the lens of a game we didn't play together. Chance of Sinar is a 2023 puzzle game in which you're tasked with deciphering a complex, unfamiliar language through NPC interactions and context clues, and then using what you learn to solve various language-based puzzles. My partner, Sif, thinks very methodically and is accustomed to using quantitative analysis as part of her job. In Sinar, she tended to take notes on words only when she had pretty solid guesses as to what they might mean, and her guesses tended to be specific and rooted in repeatable, observable data. Her translation ideas were based on what was probable. I approached Sinar's language with a much broader brush, taking notes on different combinations of meanings that I could see as being viable interpretations, and then narrowing them down as time went on. My ideas were based on what was possible. Chance of Sinar is excellent in that it makes space for either kind of player, but the other games we've tag-teamed challenge you to practice both types of thinking, with eyes peeled for possibility and a mind focused on probability. I also really struggle with directions. Part of me has always felt that Outer Wilds would have been interesting to tackle together if I hadn't played it by myself. It features the kinds of puzzles and problem solving that Sif loves, paired with the kind of platforming and exploration that I do. That said, another part of me, the louder part, is confident it wouldn't have gone well. The clunky flight controls and dizzying camera would certainly have frustrated her, even if I was in the pilot's seat. But there was a moment in the Echoes of the Eye DLC that served as a reminder of how we complement each other. In one of the game's darker, more maze-like sections, she spared a passing glance and jumped in to help me with directions when I kept repeatedly getting lost, while I steered us around the various obstacles with a closer attention to reflexes and precision. Later, my struggles with direction worked in our favor when I tried something I absolutely did not expect would work, just to test out the possibilities, only to find that it opened a different pathway we'd previously never expected. In this way, she's better at playing puzzle games in the intended way, despite having considerably less experience with video games, and I'm more likely to find unintended solutions. On the flip side, seeing Sif play an action game like Hades was a revelation. Initially, I'd been pretty confident that she wouldn't have liked it. Her favorite games up to that point had been Overcooked, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Stardew Valley, and Link's Awakening. I had assumed that Hades' open-ended approach to combat and complex inputs would have overwhelmed her quite quickly, but she actually ended up loving experimenting with new builds and figuring out what worked for her. Here, it was her who ended up playing in new, unintended ways I'd never have thought of. For instance, I once walked in on her using quote-unquote stealth to fight the chariots in Elysium, sniping them from behind cover in a way I'd never considered possible. She was thinking strategically in a game that encourages you to fight head-on, and it was working?
This brings us, finally, to cooperative multiplayer. Because of our strengths and weaknesses, Arf and I fill certain roles for each other when we play co-op games. What those roles will be, naturally, differ for every couple and pair. I like to call him the platformer, while he calls me the strategist. Arf is a lot more experienced with the verbs of video games, especially action-adventure ones, and he's good at executing exactly what you ask him to while avoiding any obstacles thrown his way.
Sif is an excellent planner, with an eye for puzzle solving, contingency, and resource management. She's extremely good at quantitative analysis and at reading exactly which visual cues a game wants us to pick up on, in addition to what those cues are supposed to entail in what order.
For what it's worth, I do understand the temptation some might have to flatten these roles into a gender binary reinforced by social conditioning. But we both feel that these affinities have 1. More to do with our personalities than they do our gender identities, and 2. Are domain-specific to video games. IRL, we often end up taking on roles that contradict those dictated by a socially conditioned gender binary as it could apply to us. I'm almost always driving the car in real life, but one of the reasons I'm worse at action and platforming in games is that I tend to be too aggressive. I mostly drive on the East Coast, so that tends to be a plus. But in games, you can't brute force progress most of the time. Slipping on ice and then approaching the ice more aggressively isn't going to lead to better platforming. Arf has a calmer mentality. He likes to take his time when exploring, but is quick with reflexes and doesn't get frazzled, no matter how complicated the obstacle course.
I get to work from home more often and take on a lot of the housekeeping in the moments in between. But in games, I tend to overthink puzzles and tasks that would otherwise be routine. I really enjoy thinking through them and even tinkering with wrong solutions, because I think of those errors as part of my process. Most games don't offer a lot of room for creative solutions, but I like exercising my brain to think of creative opportunities, even if they won't ultimately apply. For me, that's the fun of video games, taking a break from the restrictions imposed by real life. But that process isn't as useful when working with someone. You need specific strategies before you can start execution. Sif instead approaches these scenarios more methodically. She's good at delegating tasks based on her strengths right off the bat. In Overcooked, for instance, she's usually the first to notice the layout of a given map or the order of recipes, and figure out the most efficient way for us to apply our individual strengths to it.
Importantly, this approach of leveraging what we're each good at only applies for some types of co-op games, those that involve complementary coordination. Basically, whenever you're coordinating a task with someone, you're engaging in one of 2 types of coordination. Correlative or parallel coordination, where each person might be doing half of the same task or completely independent tasks to accomplish the shared goal, or complementary coordination, where each person is doing a different task that relies on the other in order to accomplish the shared goal. So, if you're looking at a huge pile of dishes in your sink the morning after a party, you and your roommate might choose to each do half of the dishes at a different time depending on your schedule, or split it up so one of you washes and one of you dries and puts away the dishes. Most co-op games rely primarily on one or the other, but some require a mix of both depending on the level. For example, in Moving Out, you can move the single-player items by yourself, and you only really have to coordinate around when and how you're going to move the large 2-player items. For the most part, you can do your own thing, however. Overcooked, on the other hand, largely relies on complementary coordination. One person might be chopping while the other is steaming or serving, and the game requires you to interact with each other to complete the level. However, a few levels allow for mostly correlative coordination, so that each player can fully independently prepare and serve orders. Arf and I have found ourselves gravitating towards games that require, or at least encourage, complementary coordination. And I'm gonna hypothesize, with very little objective data, but hopefully some convincing theoretical work on coordination, that it's because this type of coordination builds greater efficiency and collaborative spirit over time. Sidebar, there's a lot of work on the influence of synchrony in movement on subsequent interpersonal coordination. These studies suggest that, for example, tapping in synchrony with your partner can increase interpersonal coordination and positive ratings of your partner across a few different dimensions. I'm not going to talk about this because I think this applies more to games that focus on movement synchrony, like Just Dance. Correlative coordination doesn't always lead to synchrony. You might be doing the same things, but not necessarily in time with each other. So I think it's fair to say that, depending on the game, you might get similar levels of synchrony for correlative and complementary strategies. Before I dig into this idea, I wanted to mention that I was really inspired to think critically about the role of complementary coordination in our relationship while reading Kaylin O'Connor's book, The Origins of Unfairness. Parts of her book might be a little dense if you don't have an economics background, which I do not, but her ideas are groundbreaking and spurred basically my entire research program in grad school. She's an excellent writer with great jokes, and if you're interested in an evolutionary perspective on unfairness and social categories, I highly recommend her book. I'll be touching on fairness as well, but before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about something related: efficiency. One of the big reasons to coordinate, if you're coordinating successfully, is that you can increase efficiency. This is pretty intuitive, and if it's not, you probably learned about it when you studied the Industrial Revolution in school. Those lessons usually try to hammer home the point that specialization is what really increases efficiency, and this concept of complementary coordination is rooted in the same idea. Basically, if my partner always washes dishes and I always dry them, over time, we'll both get really good at our own specialty and become more efficient overall. At the start of coordination, if you can divide the labor according to preference or prior skill, for example, if I always dry dishes because I prefer that over washing dishes, or am better at it than my partner, that can also boost efficiency and positive vibes in general.
Overcooked kitchens can sometimes force you to swap roles, so although we have our own specialties, we do have a basic understanding of how every piece of the game works. We just might be more specialized in some areas than others. For the logical extreme though, consider lovers in a dangerous space-time. In the game, you and your partner, up to 4 players, pilot a spaceship together. Each person can freely move around the ship and man different stations, but that's not really an optimal way to play. It's better to delegate specific tasks to each other and to then focus on those, consistently, the entire game through. So one person might pilot, 2 might man guns on opposite sides, and 1 might be in charge of shields. Depending on how many people you play with, the 2 of us played with our siblings, you can become increasingly specialized. The game even recognizes this. You can unlock more ships later in the game, at least one of which divides up access between players. At most times, you do have to have some degree of control over all of these moving parts, so it is beneficial to get really good at one thing. Specializing in lovers is a great tactic to carry you through the entire game, and it's a really good example of a game that demands complementary coordination.
Most people, including the 2 of us, attempt to increase efficiency with the intention of doing so for both people. That is, prioritizing co-efficiency during joint action. It might seem intuitive that people would just try to decrease the cost for themselves when coordinating with someone else. In Overcooked, that might look like just figuring out the shortest path from the stock cupboard to the cutting board for the player in charge of cutting. But people actually try to decrease aggregate costs for their dyad instead, which would be similar to figuring out not only the shortest path for the player who is cutting, but also the most helpful place to set the cut food down for the player picking it up. I think there's another benefit to this that goes beyond efficiency. You get to show that you care about decreasing the cost for your partner. So over multiple instances of co-efficient coordinating, you're building goodwill. And I think by doing so using complementary coordination, you're validating that your partner adds value to your gaming experience using their own unique skills that they've specialized. You might notice that everything I've said so far about complementary coordination compounds over multiple instances. This is pretty key to how we think co-op games have helped our relationship. In addition to specialization, complementary coordination helps with the communication problem in co-op games by establishing conventions or norms over time. When Arf and I talked about the roles we take on in co-op games, those are roles we establish over repeated plays. Now, when we start a new game, there's a little bit of communication that happens as we mold the roles we take onto the new format, but at this point, this is a lot faster than it was at the start of our gaming relationship, and we can jump into playing with new co-op games. I think a good example of how we've leveraged the benefits of complementary coordination is the way we choose to play Ship of Fools together. Ship of Fools is one game that offers players some choice in the kind of coordination they want to engage in. The game is a roguelike where players staff a ship that goes out into the open sea, fighting monsters to make their way through each level. Playable characters, termed fools, each have their own special ability, and players also get to choose a cannon each to use on the ship. If you wanted to, you and your gaming partner could choose fools with similar abilities, or even the exact same cannon. This would facilitate a strategy of mostly correlative coordination. You would both have fools with the same strengths and weaknesses, so taking on similar roles during the game might feel more natural. Since Arf and I prefer to engage in complementary coordination, we always choose fools with completely different strengths. I prefer button mashing my way through fights, a pretty aggressive approach, so I usually take on close combat and stack up on paddle power-ups. Arf is much better at aiming, so he's usually in charge of cannons. And we even go a step further and prioritize him using both cannons instead of dividing up cannon use equally.
And to maximize co-efficiency, Sif might even take charge of watching my ammo type, or count, and reloading for me, while I get to focus on firing, or reeling in items.
Ship of Fools actually encourages this kind of complementary coordination through specific game mechanics. Some battles require engaging in both types of combat simultaneously, so that each person taking on a different role in combat makes battles more efficient and less stressful, since we don't need to constantly call out which part of the fight we're tackling. On the other hand, some battles require correlative coordination, so Ship of Fools does incorporate both. As you go through each level, you can also pick up trinkets, or objects that provide skill-ups for your fool, and create a specific build over time. Since you typically only have one of each trinket, equipping it involves making a decision about whose fool should have the bonus. If you aim for builds that leverage completely different skills, the way we do, these decisions tend to be quick and intuitive. Even though each run is completely unique and results in totally new builds, across runs, we've built up a pattern of what we prioritize for each person, reducing the need for discussion or negotiation every time. I've mentioned mostly the positives so far, but Kaylin O'Connor's book really neatly lays out the potential negatives of complementary coordination. It is called The Origins of Unfairness, after all. Earlier, I talked about how complementary coordination is particularly great if my partner and I have different preferences or prior competencies, but there is of course a potential for the opposite. My partner and I could both prefer or be good at the same things, making any potential complementary coordination solution fundamentally unequal. This could also be the case if the level itself requires one player to take on a more costly task, or the tasks have different rewards. And over repeated plays, an unequal compromise in the short run might result in long-term persistent inequalities. This is less likely to happen with correlative coordination. It's much easier to just accidentally perpetuate inequalities in complementary coordination. But I think that provides the opportunity to be intentional in avoiding unfairness in your relationship. At the beginning of our relationship, at the start of a new game, and regularly throughout our gameplay, we do check-ins to make sure that the coordination partnership still feels fair to both of us. While it might decrease some of that efficiency we gain by dividing up roles overall, fairness is a core tenet of our relationship, and it's worth it to us. Plus, having these conversations in a low-stakes situation like gaming builds good communication patterns about this very topic when it comes to high-stakes contexts like division of household labor. So, complementary coordination isn't a fix-everything alternative to couples therapy,
despite what the goddamn book in It Takes Two might tell you,
but something we've added to our arsenal as a way of building a healthier relationship. Importantly, having these roles for us is a way to affirm the personal characteristics and skills that we each bring to the relationship. It helps concretize our unique contribution in building our life together, both in-game and out in the real world. And having these roles be broadly applicable means that we don't feel stereotyped and constricted by them. Instead, the roles are flexible, something we can adapt when coordinating in new situations. This is important because the research on transferring efficient cooperation across tasks demonstrates that the extent to which efficiency transfers depends on how similar the strategies employable across tasks are. Embodying roles that we can carry with us to each new game is an important part of what makes our complementary coordination work.
And codifying these roles in video games, the platformer and the strategist, also makes it easier for us to coordinate in real life. To be clear, I'm not saying there's a direct translation to the roles we take on in our everyday lives. I'm not parkouring to get groceries from the car to the house. But coordinating in games reinforces the strong complementary relationship we have. It makes it easier for us to communicate about how we're going to split roles in new situations, and helps reinforce the strong, positive reciprocity norms we've developed in stressful situations. And that prosociality just keeps on giving. We're motivated to help each other, know the other person is motivated to help us, used to navigating and contributing to shared goals, and have a lot of practice with negotiation and de-escalation. This doesn't mean we've answered every question, of course. More work would need to be done on how much you retain from playing complementary co-op together, and the way the longevity and replayability of a game factors into that. Overcooked features a 4th star rating difficulty that unlocks after you beat it for the first time, and has received several free updates from Ghost Town that have made it a genuinely difficult and lengthy game. The two of us are committed to completing all levels on 4 stars, and have, through repeated play, only improved at playing it. Ship of Fools is a roguelike, and so we end up revisiting it a lot more often than Dangerous Spacetime, just by virtue of how different each run can be. There's always the possibility of further self-improvement. Stardew Valley takes place over several years, and so, even if you favor a divide-and-conquer approach that's more parallel than complementary, you might still end up specializing in different tasks, and take on more complementary roles in the long run. You are, after all, working towards the best form possible. But is it ever best enough? Improving the form means improving yourself, in whatever roles you prioritize. Within the world of games, Overcooked is the title that best exemplifies these roles for us. But it's not going to be that way for every player. You and your friend, or partner, or sibling might be a navigator and a quartermaster. So you can take on those roles in Lovers in a Dangerous Spacetime by manning different parts of the ship. One of you can prioritize exploration, while the other handles combat and maintenance. You can even pick a ship that makes it easy to keep within those roles. Maybe you're a gunner and a swordsman. Maybe you have more precise aim, and your friend is better at multitasking, so they can automate their cannon in Ship of Fools and focus on deflecting projectiles and dealing with threats on deck, while you blast away at the creatures at sea. Maybe you're a planner and an executor. You might have a strong creative vision for how you'd like your Stardew Valley farm to look, and how you might get there, and your partner might prefer the structure and routine of just following that vision. Or maybe you're a chef and a technician. There's nothing holding you to the same roles we divide ourselves along in Overcooked. All of this takes us back to It Takes Two. While Overcooked offers us a more specialized experience suited to our own, pardon the pun, tastes, It Takes Two works as a remarkable sampler for different kinds of play, especially for new players looking to get into couch co-op for the first time. In the game, Cody and May don't just bond through overcoming difficult challenges together, they also bond through play. It's why there are so many mini-games sprinkled throughout to promote healthy competition, and also why the game so frequently changes genre and presentation midway through levels, paying homage to different kinds of multiplayer games. It is a game about gaming. By extension, it's also a game that wants you to have fun with a wide range of ever-changing roles pulled from all across the video game landscape. Maybe you'll find one that resonates strongest with you. We believe It Takes Two can make for an excellent starter game for anyone looking to get into couch co-op for the first time, or just a lovely retrospective for those who've been playing for longer. When it comes to specific roles and patterns, though, that spark conversations about your individual strengths and how they complement each other, well, there are longer-term titles out there to really help fine-tune that. It's just a matter of finding one that challenges you to coordinate complementarily, and maybe pumps your heart a little bit.
Warning: this video contains spoilers for the following games.
Dark Souls.
No!